All right. Welcome to the Novel Idea Society for April. And thank you all for coming tonight. It is nice to see so many familiar faces and also to see so many faces I haven't seen in a long time. This month we read, blurred background problems.
Hold on.
There you go. You Will Remember Me by Hannah Mary McKinnon, who joins us tonight. It is always a delight when we can have an author join us to talk about the book and the process and writing, because if we have learned anything through this book club, no author does the same thing the same way. Everyone has their own process. So thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about where you are and maybe what you did today.
Okay, so I'm in Oakville, about 40 kilometers, I guess, west of Toronto. Lived here for 12 years. And today I wrote. Surprise, shocker. Yes, I'm working on a new novel. So that was what I did. And I did a few graphics and other authorly things. But mainly I edited a next book.
How did you find your way to writing?
My writing career started from failure. So I'm not somebody who always dreamt of writing books. I used to love writing in school for sure, but then I was very, very career focused. And so after I left school and studied and got my first job and then my second and whatnot, my career exploded in IT recruitment. And I didn't think about writing at all until we came to Canada in 2010. So my husband's Canadian, and we met. He moved to Switzerland, where I grew up. I know I sound really English, and I am, but I grew up and lived in Switzerland for 35 years. And when we came here, I started up my own company, a spin in HR, and it failed. Quite spectacularly. It crashed and burned within the first year of inception. It just died a swift but painful death. And that left me at a crossroads. What was I going to do next? And I didn't really know, because honestly, I had attached my identity to work. If I didn't have my big career, I was the CEO of this IT recruitment company, so a very, very good role. And once I didn't have that anymore, I didn't know who I was or what I wanted to do. So after I'd moped around a bit, Rob said, well, Rob's my husband, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I half-heartedly said, well, I guess I'd like to write a novel. And he said, well, why don't you do that then? So and here we are. It all worked out. So it was really something that I knew I loved. I'd always loved books and I enjoyed writing, but didn't have the opportunity to write creatively. And then I had the option to keep going corporate, which I loved, or try something else. So I tried something else, and my 6th book publishes next month.
That's amazing. Like a real pivot, make it work, totally new career. But your first book, I have to say, I learned the hard way when we read The Handmaid's Tale that you have to read everything that comes after the last chapter. People in the book club will know this because I missed the entire end of the book because I didn't read the historical notes. I now read everything at the end of the book, and I did read the conversation you had at the end of the book. So I kind of know the answers to some of these questions. So my apologies to other people if they got those notes as well. But your first book is nothing like the rest of your catalog, if you will. So tell us about the first book and then the pivot to thrillers.
So the first book, Time After Time, is a rom-com. It's Groundhog Day meets Sliding Doors, if you're familiar with those two movies. It's really the love child of those two films. And basically what happened was I had an idea. This was when we'd come to Canada and the company had failed, and I was, moping around trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and was I going to write a book? And I didn't start with short stories, like most people would. No, I just decided I'm going to write a book. And I had this idea for a woman who was in her early 40s, maybe with or without some curly brown hair, you see where this is going, who's wondering about her life and the decisions she's made and where she's ended up, wondering how things might have turned out had she made different choices, specifically if she'd married her first boyfriend. And then she wakes up the next morning and she's married to said ex-boyfriend, but she's the only one who realizes that this is not her life. She's getting a glimpse because she's been wondering, and stuff happens. And the rom-com, really, I think it was, I was in a not in a really good place. I was really homesick. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know if we'd made the right decision moving here. We don't have family here. And I was pretty lonely, honestly. And the idea just struck me. So I took the kids, we have 3 kids, they're older now, but I took them to an indoor playground and lined up some snacks and water bottles and said, go play, and wrote the outline in a couple of hours. It was very, very clear. It took a lot of work, so I made a ton of mistakes. But once I've written that one, so in a way, and Rob and I are fine. We've been married 23 years. He's the love of my life. It's all good. But it was just maybe I needed to kind of write myself a happy ending in a way, looking back. And honestly, looking back now, when I think about how lost I felt and awful I felt in comparison to other people who come to Canada as immigrants, I have it really easy. So I'd like to go back and just tell myself to, pull myself together and get on with it. But you don't see that when you're in the thick of it. And so the transition to thrillers, I used to read thrillers all the time. When I was a teenager, that was my thing. My mum and I, we'd share books. And then my best friend died. He was murdered when I was in my early 20s. And that really threw me for a loop. It was very high profile. It was very devastating. And I couldn't read thrillers anymore. For about 20 years, I think I don't think I read many, maybe a handful of thrillers. I just couldn't do it. But I was at a library one day, the one in Oakville, and I walked past a book called Creep by Jennifer Hillier, who's also from Oakville and also an author. I didn't know her at the time. And there was just something about that cover. It's a grey cover with the word creep in big red letters and a pair of handcuffs dangling down. And I thought, I've got to read that. So I picked it up and I read the jacket and I started reading it. I thought, okay, this is coming home with me. And it was that book that almost gave me, I don't know, the kick I needed, the spark I needed to go back to the books that I love. And I was writing what became The Neighbours at the time, and I knew it was edgier, it was darker, it was grittier than Time After Time. Things were not going to work out well for everyone in the end. And it was Jennifer's book that propelled me over to the dark side of thrillers. And we became friends afterwards, actually. I had a fangirl moment at a book conference when I met her. Found out she was moving back to Oakville, and now we're really close friends. So it's funny how things work out.
What was it like, that moment that you told her that she literally changed the trajectory of your career?
It was in Toronto at a hotel. I think it was the Marriott or something. And I was going down the escalators and I see her, and I knew it was her. I knew it was just, so I'm, The Neighbours hadn't come out. Time After Time had published, but The Neighbours hadn't come out. And I had a bit of a moment. And she was standing there with 2 people, and I went up to them. I said, excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. And I'm pretty sure my voice was probably that high pitched too. I'm a huge fan, and your book, it just changed the way I wanted to write. And I just wanted to say thank you. And she was really, really touched. And she actually said, well, I'm moving back to Oakville, so let's get in touch and we can go for coffee. And I'm just fainting at this point. It was extraordinary. It was really quite something. It was wonderful. She's amazing.
So you write The Neighbours.
Mm-hmm.
It's your first thriller, very different from a rom-com. Yeah. How was it received, and how did the publisher take that on? How did you go from rom-com to thriller to multiple thrillers?
So Time After Time sold to HarperCollins UK, to their Avon brand. And it's sold under their digital first umbrella, which means that they published the book as an ebook first, with the intention that if and when it did well, that it would be published as, in paperback. Time After Time to this day, it was published in 2016, only exists in ebook. So that tells you all you need to know about how successful it was. It did okay, but it didn't make any lists, bestseller lists, or break any records, that's for sure. But what it did do was allow us to approach other publishers as well and say, in my agent to do that and say, this is not Hannah's debut. And so initially, actually, Avon, HarperCollins UK, they didn't mind that I switched genres. They were open to that, but they offered another digital first deal. And I really, really wanted a physical book. I wanted to be able to go into my local bookstore or the library or Indigo or wherever and see my book on the shelves. That was a real dream, hold it in my hands instead of holding my Kindle, which is great too, but I just wanted the physical book. And so we went out on a wider submission, and HarperCollins here, so North America, have picked up all of my books from there on. And they didn't mind either that I switched genre. I think probably because they pitched really The Neighbours as my debut, my thriller debut. And because Time After Time hadn't broken any records, certainly not this side of the Atlantic or in the UK, actually, it didn't really matter. So they were happy with that. And I got a traditional book deal in the sense that, it's print and audio and ebook for a 2-book deal. They gave me a 2-book deal, which was wonderful. And I've worked with them ever since and love them to bits.
So when you got that 2-book deal, I mean, we've talked to other authors about how sometimes they have to have an outline or a premise. When you got that 2-book deal, what was required of you?
So The Neighbours was done. I mean, it needed editing for sure, but it was done. And I remember getting word. I remember my agent calling me and saying, "Okay, this is the deal. It's a 2-book deal." And I think I said, "Oh, but what will the second one be?" Because I was working on a project, but it didn't really fit the suspense arena. But it didn't fit the rom-com either. It was a bit of a muddle somewhere in between. And they said, so HarperCollins said, "Don't worry, we'll figure out what the second of the 2-book deal is. Don't worry, we'll figure it out." And so they asked me what I was working on. I shared what I was working on. I said, "But I'm not sure it fits." And they agreed. And they asked me, "What else have you got?" And as it happened, a couple of days earlier, I'd been at the gym on the treadmill, I believe, bored probably, watching the news. And there was a segment that came up. And I won't tell you what it was about because I'll spoil the book. But it was just such an intriguing story, particularly if I took the premise and flipped it and told the story from another person, from another character's perspective. Her secret son is the stepfather's perspective. It's all from a male point of view. His partner dies of 5 years, leaving behind her 7-year-old son. And he goes looking for the birth certificate so he can arrange legal guardianship for this young kid, and he can't find it. And that's just the first, anomaly and mystery that he has to decide whether he wants to solve or not. And of course he does, otherwise it would be a really short book. And so when I pitched that, in a couple of lines, I remember my editor saying, "Oh, yeah, write that." And so then I outlined, and that became A Secret Son.
So in thrillers, I'm guessing you have to outline, because otherwise you end up on this winding trail that may never end. Is that, I've never written a book, so that's just my assumption.
It depends. So I'm a very heavy outliner and plotter. I have a whole process that I actually just gave a workshop on Sunday. I break things down into digestible steps. I call my workshop "How to Eat an Elephant." One bite at a time, obviously. And it's the same with a book. If I think I have to deliver a manuscript with 90,000 words or 300 odd pages in 6 months' time, OMG. But if I break it down into 30 chapters of 3,000 words each, oh, that sounds reasonable. I can do that. It's trickery, really. But if I drive somewhere, I like having a GPS. If there's no GPS, I'd like to have someone who has a map, please, so I know where I'm going. But I know multiple authors, hugely successful authors, who don't outline. I think the most, the ones that have stayed with me with their process the most, Mary Kubica, who wrote The Good Girl, and Samantha Downing, who wrote My Lovely Wife. He started it For Your Own Good. Both of them are two of my favorites. And they don't outline ahead of time. So they do plot their books, but they plot as they're writing. But Mary will go even a step further. So she'll have multiple multiple point of view books. So she'll write without an outline, the first character, the second chapters, the third, and then weave them together. If I had to do that, I'd probably run away screaming. So I like an outline, although I'm not married to the outline. So I have an outline, I have an ending, but things can and do shift depending on where the characters in the story takes me. Because sometimes the plot you think is the right one turns out not to be. And so I'm flexible with that.
Okay, let's go to You Will Remember Me then in that instant. Did you start with the premise? Did you start with an ending? Like, where did that book start and where did it end? And was it different?
It started with a news segment. It started with a gentleman from Toronto who went missing from a ski hill in Lake Placid. And he woke up, or he went missing. He just disappeared off the face of the mountain. Nobody knew where he had said he was going back to the car, and then he just vanished. And people thought he had died, and people feared that he had perished on the mountain, that he'd gone back up and had fallen and maybe, come unconscious and would freeze overnight and wouldn't be found until much later. And he was found 6 days later in Sacramento in his ski gear, with a credit card in his pocket and no memory. And I just thought, I remember reading that and just thinking that must be terrifying, of course. But also that's where the thriller author brain kicks in. Oh my gosh, that's really awful. Ooh, what else could happen if I make this person now a fictional character and we get him home? What happens if he goes home and he doesn't actually know that he doesn't want to be there, but he has to rely on these people to tell him who he is? Because that's the extraordinary thing with amnesia. Certainly the type that I gave Jack in the book is that you have to rely on everybody to tell you who you are, to tell you your history. And then you have to trust them. You have to trust that what they're telling you is the truth. And you wouldn't necessarily know because you have no memory. And all of that just sounded so compelling. So that was where the story started. I had a couple of endings in mind. I like the one I chose the best, but I remember talking to my editor Emily, and I said, I've got a couple of options in mind. How dark and twisty can I go? And she said, as dark and twisty as you please. And so I did.
Well, I think the thing about thrillers is there's often an unreliable narrator, but when you give one of your main characters amnesia, you make them like the unreliable narrator thing like hits a new level of like what is real and what isn't. I have a character trait where when I'm reading these books, I am determined to figure out who it is, when it is, like very early on. And it was on a page 136 that I knew that Maya was the problem, but I didn't know how you were going to get there. And I found it interesting that you broke that like fourth wall, like they'd say in television at the end when you say, oh, you thought this would be a happy ending, because typically the author doesn't actually address the reader in that way. What made you do that?
Maya was one of the most, I think, interesting characters I've written, because she's so damaged and obviously has issues, and yet she thinks what she's doing is good, which is almost scarier than because she really has just this obsession with Ash, and what she's doing is good for him, and that's what she's decided, and nothing will sway her. And the end, I think it was the voice. I remember writing that chapter, and that, while a lot of the I'd say the last third needed a lot of editing, because that book really, it was tough to write a character with amnesia. It really was. But that last chapter, as much as I rewrote and we edited the last third, the last chapter barely changed, because her voice, I found it was so compelling how she's going to tell this story at the end. This is what I did, and this is why it's okay, and this is what's going to happen at the end. And I listen to my audiobooks. A lot of authors don't. They find it a little strange to listen to their audiobooks. I love it. I find it educational, because I notice things that I really need to stop doing. But I also find it hugely entertaining, because it's no longer my work. I don't see it as my work anymore. It's their performance, it's not my work. And I love seeing what they do with it. And they're just absolutely brilliant. And I remember I was out for a walk, because I always walk with an audiobook, and I listened to the last chapter, and it gave me goosebumps. It gave me the creeps, and I'd written it. So that was Lauren Ezzo. She's the narrator. She's extraordinary. And yeah, that chapter, it just stayed with me. It was Maya's voice. It was just so compelling. I needed her to have that final word and explain why.
The setting, I know it's set in Maine, in Maryland. I'm wondering if you'd been there and if those are real places, because reading it, I've been to Newport in Rhode Island. There's bluffs there. Like, I felt like I was envisioning it in the same, like, because I've never been to Maine, but I've been to Rhode Island, and I very much like the bluffs, the cliffs, it's all the same there. So I was curious if those are real places or fictional places, and if you'd been there, what kind of research you did into the landscape, because it seemed very real.
Oh, thank you. That's a huge compliment. Thank you very much. So I've never been to Maryland, but I have a friend there, Brad Spoon from Audio Shelf. They do audiobook reviews. And I asked him, I said, I'm going to use Maryland, and can you help me out a bit, give me a bit of insight. The town, though, is fictional, because I needed to, and I do that sometimes. It depends on the book. But with this one, I made up a fictional town in Maryland and also in Maine. So I've been to Maine. We have family in New Brunswick, and when we go, pre-COVID times, we would drive through the States and stop off in Portland and drive through Maine. And I really, really like it. It's very rugged. It's very New Brunswicky, really. And I just love Portland in particular, and just the surrounding areas. So that's how I decided where to place the towns. I needed to have 2 towns in 2 separate states within driving distance, but if somebody drowned off the coast in Maryland, that it wouldn't necessarily make the news in Maine. That was the thinking behind it.
Interesting. So when it comes to these characters in this book, you had told me before we started this that you got a little blowback about the ending. So what have you heard from people about how this one played out?
Well, I've heard some people say they wanted a happy ending, but it's all a matter of perspective, because Maya got her happy ending, if you look at it that way. Look, it's always a challenge to have a bit of an ending that's perhaps a little less conventional than what people would expect. The trouble is, if you deliver an ending that is expected, it will make people happy, but it also becomes potentially predictable. And I didn't want a predictable ending, and I wanted evil to win, at least for a while, because it happens, and because also, we were talking about this earlier, I love not books that have ambiguous endings. I find that frustrating. I have to go and Google and figure out what on earth happened. What was that about? But I do like books that stay with me. Gone Girl, you know, the classic, the Nirvana of books for people who write in my genre. I still think about Nick and Amy Dunn to this day. I wonder what happened to those two. Are they both still alive? And if not, who did what to whom? And that book is just those endings, they just stay with me. There are a number of books like that. And I enjoy endings like that. And I try and write the stuff that I enjoy. But yes, there were some people who said, oh, I love 98% of the book, but just not the last 2%. That's not how it should have ended. And that's fine, you know. Everybody has their own preference, but I like the twisted endings. I'm okay with them.
I read that the happier you are, the more twisted you write. Is that true?
Yeah, to a degree. I think so. I think, yeah. You know, funny thing, the next book that comes out, so that's Never Coming Home, it publishes next month, is all written from the bad guy's perspective. It's exclusively written from Lucas's point of view, who hires a hitman to kill his rich wife and wait to cash in, basically. And all of it's written from his point of view, but he's funny. He's actually, if you can, you know, disregard the fact that he's a murderer, he's actually kind of fun to hang out with. You know, just it's not personal. He just wants some money, and he wouldn't kill us because we're not married to him, and he doesn't want our money. He wants hers, so it's all fine. But he was just hilarious to hang out with, and I wrote that book in 2020. Started writing it, so this was the first year of the pandemic. And my mum passed away in July. She was in Switzerland. I couldn't get to see her. So I had to say goodbye from here, which is just horrible. And so I was unhappy, but I was writing a thriller, but I made it funny. And every day I went into that manuscript, I was looking forward to seeing Lucas and making him this cheeky, sarcastic, murderous character and have fun while I was doing it. So yeah, I think it's true that when I mean, Never Coming Home is pretty twisty. But I was not very happy while I wrote most of it because of circumstance, of course. 2020 was a hard year for everyone. So I don't know. Yeah, there's a bit of truth in that theory, I guess. That's a fair comment.
I'm sorry to hear about your mom. That's it's a really hard thing to go through, and from so far away. Have you been able to connect with other authors and support each other through the pandemic? I mean, being an author is already a pretty isolating life. And then when you throw a forced isolation on it, how did you handle that?
One of the beautiful things that came into my life from the pandemic was First Chapter Fun, which some of you may have heard of. So First Chapter Fun is a labor of love. On March 16th, 2020, I was in a messenger group chat with about 14 authors, and we were just stunned because COVID had arrived in Canada and we could look into our future by just looking across the Atlantic and seeing what was going to happen here in a few weeks. And all of our events, I had a book coming out, Sister Dear, published in May 2020, but all of our book events were being cancelled. Everything was up in the air, everything. And we're in this messenger chat about, it was about 7:30 in the evening on March 16th. And we're talking about how we can support each other because the author community is massively supportive. It's hugely supportive. It's probably the most surprising thing that I found since I became a published author. I had no idea how supportive it is. It's truly, truly wonderful. And I floated this idea off the cuff. What if I read the first chapter of your books on Facebook and Instagram Live? And within 3 days, I'd organized 40 people to read for. I started the very next day. So this was March 16th at 7:30 in the evening. March 17th at 11:30, I went live with graphics and everything and read on Facebook and Instagram Live. And it was supposed to be a 6-week project, that because I had books coming out and books to write, and I read every single day, 7 days a week, every single day, 11:30 p.m. Eastern. And it was really, a distraction for me to stop watching the news. Sorry, CBC, but I couldn't watch the news too much. Had to limit my consumption. And it also gave me the opportunity to showcase other authors and to give back to the community that has been so generous since I was published and before. And around middle of April, powerhouse author Hank Philippi Ryan contacted me. I read for her and she said, look, what are you doing with First Chapter Fun? I hear you're reading until middle of May. I said, well, yeah, I've got a book coming out and I've got to write another one, so I can't read every day. And she said, well, you can't stop now. What if we team up? And so we did. And today was episode, I think it was 256. So we read twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday, 12:30 now, Eastern time, still on Instagram and Facebook on First Chapter Fun. We've showcased hundreds of authors. We often have giveaways that the authors and publishers sponsor, and it's only a half an hour segment. And the whole idea was to provide a safe space where people can get away from COVID, get away from whatever is going on in their life for half an hour a week, twice a week, and just come and, listen to a book. And so that's what we do. We read live, and we're not audiobook narrators, so we fluff lines, and it's really rather funny. It's truly wonderful. It's been fantastic.
Hannah, that's amazing.
Thank you.
That is really amazing. That is something that I don't know if you realize how many people benefit from that, not just the authors, but I think a lot of people looking for connection in that time found a different community. And I know that the pandemic pushed people back to books. Yes. Which fills my little word nerd heart. But to be able to have that connection, I think that's something that we found with this book club too. We used to meet in person, and I know people really want to still go back to that. But it has given us this really unique opportunity where we've been able to expand the book club, but also for authors like you to be able to come and actually have conversations with people and to show them that, that you're real people and that there's more behind the book. So I think that's really cool, and definitely something that I will check out, and I'll post links to it in the book club too, so that other people can check it out. I always ask questions at the end, but before I get into those questions, tell us about Never Coming Home Without Giving. I know you talked about it a little bit already, but without spoiling it, where did the idea come from, and what's the publish date? I know you said next month, but what's the publish date?
Yes, so it publishes May 24th. So 4 weeks today it releases. I'm really excited. And the premise came from, that's an interesting one, because normally it's something I hear on the news. Sister Dear was a CBC thing, actually. That was a CBC nugget that I found. Generally, it's something I overhear, but with Never Coming Home, it was the character. And I think it goes back again to what was going on in the world, and that I needed something that gave me some light relief, because one could argue that You Will Remember Me is not particularly necessarily a very funny book. I mean, there are some funny elements, but it's not a funny book. And I really needed something funny. And I love books and TV shows where you root for the villain, even though you know you shouldn't, because they still have some endearing qualities, or there's something about them that makes you want them to get away with whatever they've done. And I was thinking about Lucas, about his character, and that was just really appealing to me, to write an entire book from a bad guy's point of view, but to make the bad guy fun, and to make hopefully to get the readers to root for him and read it thinking, I really want him to get away with this. I want him to get away with everything he's done. I know I shouldn't, but I want him to. But why am I thinking that? And that's the feedback I've had from a number of readers, that they've said, I know I shouldn't like him, but I do. So yeah, so that was where the idea came for that one.
And you said you are writing right now, or what are you working on next?
So the book for next year is done. We have a working title for that one. It's about an anger management therapy exercise gone terribly, terribly wrong. It's a good one, good one. I shouldn't say that's my own work. I mean, it's a fun one. Not like tooting your own horn here. It's a fun one, is what I mean to say. Whether it's good or not, I'll let everybody else judge. So now I'm working on the outline for thriller number 8, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, which will be for 2024. So that one's still just an idea bubbling away, but yeah, never a dull moment.
No kidding. Is a book a year a doable pace?
I write full time. So this is my full-time gig. And gosh, I mean, there are people who work outside of writing and write a book a year. And there are other authors who write multiple books a year, and that's just astounding. So a book a year, yeah. It's, you don't have a year to write a book. Generally, I write them in about 6 months or so. Depends on the book. Never Coming Home was about 4 months. You Will Remember Me was longer because it kicked my backside. It really did. It was a toughie.
What is the best book you've read? What's your favorite? What's your like Old Faithful first thing that popped into your head?
Anything by David Nichols, which funnily enough is not a thriller. I love his books. He wrote Starter for 10. He wrote Us, which was made into a series that was on CBC. Not the creepy movie Us. No. This is a love story, the breakdown of a marriage. Not the, because I remember seeing a link, coming to cinemas near you, Us, and I clicked on it, and no, it's not David Nichols. No, this is not. So he writes these wonderful stories. Sweet Sorrow was his last one, I believe, and I'm eagerly waiting for the next one. His dialogue is incredible. He writes for film and TV, which is no doubt where that skill comes from. I absolutely love that. Lisa Jewell is another huge favorite of mine, and there are so many. But David Nichols, yeah, I'll read anything he writes.
If you were to recommend one book that is out right now that is not your own, what would you say that we should read?
Ooh, that's a really good one.
And you read a lot of first chapters, so you've had access to a lot of books.
I have. Yes, I have, and there are so many. So one book that is not well known is, I don't believe it's well known. It's called Hell Chose Me, and that is by Angel Luis Colon, and it's about a hitman. You see the tie-in with Never Coming Home there, because there's a hitman in it, but that's not why I bring it up. I remember reading the first chapter for First Chapter Fun, and it's got this pink cover with a cute little pig on the front. Don't let the cutesy pig fool you. It's about a hitman who sees the ghosts of his victims, and they travel with him for a while. And it's hard-boiled noir, so it's pretty graphic and not something I often read. But I remember reading that first chapter and thinking, I've got to read that. I have to read that. And I did, and I read it in a weekend.
Fantastic. Do you have any questions for me? And if not, I will open it up to everybody else.
Yes, open it up. Sure.
Okay. If you have a question, you can do the little hand raisy thingy, or you can put it in the chat box and I can ask it for you, or she can see it as well. So if you guys have questions or comments or whatever you want to say, if you got a beef with the ending, you got an opportunity.
I can't change it.
All right, Kristen.
I'm just curious. I found it really interesting. I just finished it today. I read it in 2 days. And I just finished it today, like an hour before this started. And I was curious. I found it interesting that Ash had no voice in the ending. And I wondered if that was intentional on your part and why.
Completely intentional, because basically he's trapped. He's drugged and trapped, and he has, at that point in time, no say in what is going on. So I really wanted Maya to have the last word and to increase the creepiness level of the book a little bit more.
Thanks, you definitely succeeded.
Oh, thank you.
Joy, go ahead.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure.
I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you.
Twice during my reading of it, I came across something that made me stop and think, this isn't right. Two ways you pick to kill people. One was the nail gun.
Yes.
I thought that didn't make any sense because, first of all, he was a professional carpenter. They would never leave it plugged in. And she just picked it up and shot it. And second of all, you have to actually train to use them. They're so difficult to use. And there was nothing before that that implied that she knew how to use any kind of carpentry tools. Okay, so then the scissor jack, like what made you pick that? Like not just because it didn't make sense that you could actually kill somebody with that particular kind of jack. So I wondered how you picked it.
So my husband and I often have very interesting conversations. So one of them was sitting in the office. We have computer screens at desks facing each other, and he came home from work. And I'll do my research during the day and then say, did you know? So I popped my head over the screen. I said, did you know if you give somebody a brackets insert a drug that over-the-counter drug that you will find in most people's homes, often enough it will mess with their memory? And he looked at me and he said, you're talking about a fictional someone, right? I said, yeah. About half an hour later, he's watching TV, and I walk in and I sat down and I said, he's a big car guy, he's a big gearhead, petrol head. And I walked in and I said, if someone's working underneath a car and it's jacked up and you bump the car with your hip, could you make it fall? And he said, depending on the jack, yeah. And I said, ooh, tell me more. So that was where the scissor jack came from. So if you have a beef with the scissor jack, I'm going to have to speak to him because he was my technical advisor on that.
Yeah, because I looked it up and well, because I really enjoy knowing how people die, and I like it accurate.
Should we worry about you, Joy?
Absolutely. But in the meantime, yeah, it didn't click with what I read about it, and the same with the nail gun and carpenters in general and their safety. So just FYI, there's some of us crackpot killers out here that pick that stuff up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I did not expect that to go that way. So yeah, Carlos, you're next.
That's a hard one to follow. Joy, though, a scissor jacks, they are quite dangerous. I was changing a tire once and the jack kind of moved.
Especially if the ground is unstable, which is
exactly
why the ground
it was kind of a mushy dirt road, right? So that part, yeah. Anyways, I have no problem with how you killed your character. So my daughters are with their mom this week. Sorry, what was that, Hannah?
I said I haven't actually killed anyone I don't go out and practice these things. I reassure you, but
kill your characters, yes, kill the characters you create, right? So one of my daughters' name is Maya. So I told him, I'm reading this book, I'm enjoying it, I'll tell you about it when you come back. But of course, the Maya character in your book is not great. So I'm not sure how much I'll tell Maya, my daughter, about the Maya character in the book. Luckily, she has no brothers, so that's a little less creepy, right? And I think you kind of touched on this when you were talking with Sam, but the Maya character is well developed. When you're developing your characters, are they kind of a product of the outline, or do the characters sort of get developed and then they fit into your outline?
A little bit of both. So before I start writing, part of my process is I interview my characters, which sounds a little odd, but I have a 3-page questionnaire with, the usual stuff. What do they look like? What do they sound like? Where do they come from? That kind of thing. But then there's lots of other questions. How much money do they have in their bank account? Do they believe in ghosts? I don't write ghost stories, but I want to know if my characters believe in them. What kind of a car do they drive? What job are they doing? What did they do 10 years ago? What will they be doing in 10 years? brackets, some of them will be dead, spoiler alert. So it's lots and lots of questions like that. So I really like to think about my character's journey of what brought them to page 1 of chapter 1. How did they become who they are before we meet them, essentially? What's their story? So I'll think about that and develop that and make lots of notes. But then as I write, it's like a painter, I don't paint, so I shouldn't say it's like a painter, because from what I see, I can barely manage a stick man. But if you do a portrait, if you watch somebody paint a portrait, they would perhaps do a U for the face, and then 2 dashes for the eyes, an L for the nose, and another dash for the mouth. Just placements. And then they'll layer. And that's what I do as an author. I will write bare bones, my puke draft, as we like to call it, the technical term, just get the story out based on the outline to see if it really fits together and works. And then I'll layer and layer and layer, and I will unearth. It's almost like an archaeologist, I guess, because I'm digging out facets of these characters that I hadn't thought of before. Because it's impossible for me to think of every single twist and every single character trait for this cast ahead of time. And part of the fun of writing is really thinking, okay, this is who I think they are, but who are they actually going to turn into? Is it going to be similar? And how much further, how much more depth can I give them? I do spend an awful lot of time thinking about my characters and trying to make them as real as possible. It's really important to me that hopefully the readers who enjoy the books feel that the characters are real. So I try and differentiate them from one another, and just give them a different background and upbringing, and also creates more interest and more layers as I write, and hopefully for the reader.
It felt like it did. So, and thank you for the book. I did enjoy it quite much.
Thanks,
Sam.
Hannah, I wanted to ask you, you were talking about layering characters, but you also talked about how your next book is from the male perspective of a bad guy. I often find that I don't enjoy when men try to write from the female perspective. So I'm wondering, how is it for you writing the male perspective, and how do you do research about making sure you get that right, if that's even a thing that matters anymore?
So I live with 4 men, so I have a bit of an advantage. My husband and 3 teenagers, 18 and 2 17-year-olds. So I have, I'm around guys a lot. I worked with guys a lot in the corporate environment, in IT recruitment. There are a lot of guys around. Before that, I worked in manufacturing. So again, a lot of guys. But honestly, I wrote in The Neighbours, we have one male perspective, Nate. And I didn't even think about it. I just thought, this is who he is. This is who the story belongs to. And with Her Secret Son, I knew that it was going to be entirely from a man's point of view. And it did give me pause a little bit, thinking, okay, so do I have to, if I write something that's too flowery or more female-like? But actually, one bit of excellent advice that a friend gave to me, Asma Zehanat Khan, she said, men and women have emotions the same. It's the same. You might express them differently, but the emotions are there. Don't think about it too much. And so I did give a few chapters to readers. And sometimes I'll ask my husband, I'll say, would you say blah, blah? Would you use this term? He says, no. But that could be also just because it's a British term, my British slang will creep in there as well sometimes. So I do think about it. But with Lucas in Never Coming Home, I didn't really think about it at all. I feel when I write men, I can be a bit more direct, which is actually really fun.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions before we let Hannah go? You've given us lots of your time, and it is 2 hours later where you are and where we are.
It's almost 10 o'clock. Yes. So any burning questions, don't be shy. I'm an open book. Ha ha.
Nothing? Oh, Kristen's got another one. Go ahead.
This isn't specifically about the book. This is actually the first time that I've ever heard an author interviewed. So it's been really interesting for me. So thank you for that. It's phenomenal to hear from your perspective. I'm just curious what a day of writing looks like for you. I love to write. I'm not sure that I would ever write a novel, but what is, is it 8 hours of sitting at a computer, just spewing out what's in your mind? What does it look like for you?
It kind of depends on the stage that I'm at with the book. So if I'm at the stage where I'm plotting and thinking about it, I go out on plotting walks a lot, which I love. But then I can't listen to an audiobook because then I'm not working. But I'll go out and I'll just think about it. I'll have an idea and I'll think about stuff. And generally I plot at my dining table with either the laptop or some post-it notes, which I can scrunch up and chuck out. And then I'll write, so I'll have my outline, I'll go back to my computer, I'll write my outline and interview my characters and maybe build a map and maybe build a photo gallery. When I look at hairstyles, I don't use celebrities because that's distracting. And then after that, once that's all approved and whatnot with my editor, my agent, I'll start writing. And for me, the most painful part, honestly, is the blank page, because you can't edit a blank page. You've got to have words on it. And they don't write themselves, those little naughty things. And so that part really is the hardest, because I've thought about the story. I know where I want to go, and I type fast, but still not fast enough to just make it appear as if by magic. So I tend to write the puke draft, my skeleton draft, really quickly. I have a word count target, and that could take me, daily word count target. So that could take me a couple of hours, in which case I might do 2 days and just get it over with. It might take longer because it's just not clicking, or I might skip ahead. And then I'll go into the editing phase. And that phase, it could be, it just depends on the day. It could be 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 hours. It really depends. When I get to the very close to having almost finished the book and got it into the first draft that my agent and editor will see, not my first draft, this is my millionth, but I've gone over it about probably a dozen or so times, then really all bets are off, because I'm so into the book that I find that I wake up really early. And I'm washing my hair, thinking about the book, and something's happened, and I've got to rush downstairs and change it. But then there are days where I've got 3 kids, and they're older, sure, but there's still stuff going on. So I still have to plot my writing around that. So it could be anywhere from nothing, which is rare. I do tend to write every day, to a good 10 hours, but preferably not 10 hours all the time, because that's a lot.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Do your kids know when you're in writing mode? Like, do they just leave you alone if you're like super intense and getting to the end of a book?
Yeah, they do. I think they realize that the quality of the food that I prepare, because we have a rule in the house, so I'll cook during the week, and then Rob takes Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's generally how it works. And they're very good. I mean, the kids are really good. They're not kids anymore, but my children. But yeah, I think that I disappear into the office, and I'm just, my brain's going, and I'm thinking about stuff. Or we might be watching a movie together, and they'll ask me something, and I'm just, off somewhere in my plot, and then she's plotting again. One of our twins came downstairs yesterday, and he walked into the office. Rob and I were here, and he says, "Mum, I'm a bit worried about you." I said, "Why? What's going on?" He says, "I'm reading Never Coming Home." Yeah. And he said, "Well, the guy kills his wife for the insurance money. Should I worry about you and Dad?" And I said, "Well, no, but we haven't had a life insurance policy review for a while. So maybe I'll give them a call." Just what? And they know I mess with them. So yeah, it's kind of funny.
Sounds so great. Well, I could probably talk to you forever. You are a lovely interview, and you have given us a full hour of your time, and I'm so appreciative of it. With that, I think I'm going to bid you adieu. I'm going to stop recording, so I'm going to do that.